we're the sum of our experiences, and to want to change one of those experiences is ultimately to want to be someone different. And I imagine that there are people out there that would like to be, like very much to be somebody different, but I don't. But I really don't. Warts and all,
You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship.
Welcome to the Barbell Logic Podcast. I'm Scott Hambrick. That you can't see is Matt Reynolds. He's got his blue shirt on today. He keeps trying to compete with Pooter for those blue eyes, but to no avail.
To no avail.
It's just not going to work.
The thing is that the color of my face gives such good contrast to my eyes, though.
Red, white, and blue.
That's right.
Your head is patriotic.
I'm as patriotic as they get. So we had Carl Shute, good friend of ours, and works at BLOC and Online Great Books, and we were talking through. He talked about he would love to hear a show where you and I talked about the changes that we would make if we could do it all over again. Looking back, where are the mistakes that you made along the way? And I think he's talking mostly as a lifter, although certainly we could talk some about the coaching as well. But what are the things we do differently, And you and I have such different stories that I think there can be a lot of contrast there. So I don't know, you want to start with some of the stuff in the beginning, or what are some things that stick out to you that if you could do it all over again now at the ripe old age of, what are you, 43?
44.
44. God, that's old.
44.
It feels so old to me.
I will be 50 in less than 6 years. We'll all be dead soon.
Are all your body hairs gray?
Not all of them. 2 of them aren't.
2 of them aren't.
The 2 of them, yeah.
You still got a little bit of pepper with that salt.
That's right. I get a version of this question on Instagram Lives and stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. I typically don't even care, because I don't get to do it over again.
Right, but we're not answering.
You know what I mean?
That's why I think we haven't talked about it. Right, you're right. We don't think about. I don't even think about the past that much.
Yeah, what would you do different in business if you had a chance? It's who gives a shit?
Right, but but you know what they're asking. They're not asking for you. They're asking for them, right?
See, but let me start with a business story. I'll tell a business story. I bought a competitor in 2008, and they had their own office. Of course, we didn't share an office, right? They had their own office across town, and they had a lease on that office. And I bought them in September, and that lease, I think, went through, I don't remember exactly. Let's say it was August next year, let's say. I had just a little less than 1 year left on it. And one of the things that I really needed to get out of that purchase was the office consolidation. I mean, there was, a lot of overhead over there. When I could consolidate those 2 businesses, I was going to save all that overhead. And I'd read the lease, and the landlord here in town was Swadner, SWADENER Properties. I'll name names. And I put a tickler in my calendar to write them a letter, getting out of the lease. So we closed on the business in September. And after a little of the smoke cleared and stuff, in October, I sent them a letter that says, we're going to get out next August. It ain't 30 days notice. This is 330 days notice.
Right.
Something, because why wait? I need to, and actually I think in under Oklahoma law, if they can go ahead and lease it, they can let you out.
Right. So theoretically you could have gotten out early.
Yeah.
Nothing to lose. You're thinking going into this, what can I lose?
That's right. And then, about 30 days, 15 days out, went by his office. I'm we've already moved. I mean, I actually fucking moved.
Right. You're just I'm just going to pay the rent on this for the next year.
Right.
And it's going to sit empty.
Right. I said, man, I don't want that office. I don't want to commute back and forth from my office to that one. Here's the property, lease it up. And anyway, the time came, And I went over there to give them, to get my deposit back and just wrap it all up. And they're like, oh, no. There's a notice window. 60 to 30 days.
Oh, you
notice.
gave it before 60 days, so it doesn't count at all.
Right.
Wow, that's super shitty.
It's super
and shady AF.
Super penny pinching, fucking hand wringing, grubbing bullshit. And I ended up paying, I don't remember, another 8 months rent. I don't remember what it was, but it cost me tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And now, well, I would rather do that differently. Yeah, but I mean, what lesson is there to be learned from that? People say, "Oh, read the lease, read the lease, blah blah blah." But I don't think that the guy actually had grounds to do it, even under the lease. But there are a bunch of people out there that realize, well, I can fuck this guy for just under what it'll cost him to litigate it, so I'll put that money in my pocket.
Right,
and that's what he did to me.
Live.
So thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I'd do that differently.
Yeah. I learned a lesson. I'll tell a business story that as it really is one of the most important business lessons I've learned over the past decade or so. So when I ran Strong Gym, there were 3 owners, and one of the owners was the guy that I started the gym with, William McNeely. Great friend to this day. Guy's been in our videos. He's that little jacked looking Latino man. He's half El Salvadorian, and
sweetest guy ever.
One of the nicest human beings you'd ever meet. Like literally one of those guys that no one on earth could ever say anything bad about. Like you meet a person like that. Like if you couldn't find an enemy for this guy. And the third owner of Strong Gym that we had brought on later was not William McNeely.
Right.
And so we, in the end, as things, that third owner tried to buy us out, Will and I, and there were some things that I very much disagreed with in the way business was done and morally and all those sorts of things. And I really thought that Will and I were getting the raw end of the stick. The raw end? The short end of the stick? What's the raw end?
The brown end.
The brown end of the stick. The brown end of the raw stick.
I don't know what it was.
And I, in a not so subtle ways, would talk bad about this person to some of my employees because I thought we were all on board about what kind of person he was. And we were, actually, in fact. Most of the employees agreed. But it was incredibly unprofessional and immature and juvenile of me to do so. And in the end, it forced my employees into an uncomfortable, awkward position where they were still working for both. They were working for the business, And I look back after that and I recognize that hurt some of my relationship with some of those employees because I didn't act like the leader I should have been. I instead was sort of part of the rumor mill and the gossip world. And I'm not really like wired to be that way. I just think that I was so hurt emotionally by the situation at hand in selling the gym that I vented those frustrations out to employees, and that wasn't the place to vent those frustrations. Those frustrations should have been vented to my wife and my counselor and my mentors and not my employees. And so that has, really, that lesson has really stuck with me, especially in the present. And so we take the high road, and it's important for me to let people make their own decisions about what's right and what's wrong. We try to choose what's right in our business and do the right thing and act with integrity and certainly transparency. But you can do that without throwing people under the bus. And so that's what we do. And I think I look back and I'm very thankful that I learned that lesson at Strong Gym so that in 2019, I can handle things better. And so I certainly would do it over again at Strong. But you know what? It's a lesson that I'm thankful that I learned then.
Talking about employees being aligned with you.
Yeah.
Or, you forced them to pick, That's what you're saying, I think. And so I back in the H&H contracting days in Norman, I had this guy working for me named Frank, and I was 21 years old or 20 years old, and Frank was like 56 years old. and he was a pretty good guy, but he was kind of had this wackadoo religion and kind of this jailhouse kind of religion, that like he just came upon organically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was like kind of unchecked, but he was a pretty good guy. And we had a job out in Chickasha, Oklahoma, and nothing was going right in this job out in Chickasha. We were doing a bunch of remodeling work for this giant ranch.
Okay.
Like giant.
By the way, I had a transmission go out in Chickasha once. It was not a great place for a transmission to go out.
I had a head gasket go out on a work truck out there, and my dad came down from Tulsa and helped us get the truck back in, and it was just ridiculous. And I mean, materials overruns, schedule overruns, everything. And we were driving my Nissan pickup back to Norman, and Frank was in the truck with me, and we hit a hole in this crappy road, and it knocked my muffler off. And I'm telling you, every single possible thing had gone wrong.
Sure.
Equipment, and I was beat down to the point I couldn't even cuss about it. I just kind of hung my head.
Yeah.
And I pulled over and I walked back. I picked my muffler up and put it in the back of my truck and got in the truck, fired the truck up, started heading back in. And Frank said, Scott, I think I know what's wrong with this job. And I really wanted to hear, like, I'm 21. He's got, 40 years experience on me or whatever. I'm like, oh, pray tell, Frank, what's wrong with this job? He says, God's punishing you. You're not living right. And we got back and I fired him.
We had a teacher.
But if the guy thinks, if he works for me and he thinks that the wrath of God is coming down on me, he's not going to be a good employee for me.
That's probably a bad deal.
And it's not good for him either, by the way.
It's weird. We had a teacher where I went to high school. I won't say her name because she was actually one of my favorite teachers I ever had, and Rachel, my wife, had her too. She was my physics teacher. She was such a good teacher, and she was like that. She was I think a Christian Scientist. I think that's what they're called. If you listen to the show and you're a Christian Scientist and I screw this up, I'm not trying to throw you, but anyway, she was Rachel got sick once. Rachel was one of those girls that never missed school ever. She went to school. She never missed a day, and she got sick and missed a couple days sick. And the public school teacher told her, what is the sin in your life that you need to get rid of? This is obviously God punishing you. That's why.
A little kid. How old was she?
She was a high schooler. I mean, it was a physics teacher. She was a sophomore or junior in high school, something like that. But but still, it's just like, what an inappropriate thing to say in public school. It's one thing if you're in a, I don't know. It'd be inappropriate if you're in a private Christian school. That aligns with those values. But that wasn't. But that said, she was actually a great teacher. She was great. She was just a little wacky on that stuff. So.
That summer beat me down. That summer defeated me. It was so hot, and then that job out in Chickasha and so on, that just defeated me. That's the last summer, and I headed back to Tulsa.
And that was it. And then you did. And I don't. Did you ever talk about what did you just end that business, your construction business?
We had some liability. It wasn't worth a great deal. We had some assets that I sold. But those businesses like that, they're not worth much. You typically don't have like ongoing contracts,
right, sure.
And and it was small. We didn't have like an ongoing. Did the business carry
on with the kind of your workforce, and somebody else kind of took it over? Or
no,
did you just kind of disbanded. And
we just sold the assets. And another thing about you don't really have a workforce,
right?
Everything's like subcontractors and
they're all
lunatics and
they're nomads that move from like subcontractor to subcontractor type job. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and when you'd go into off season, you'd lose half of them anyway, and then it was just a big mess.
So we talked about some business stuff. What in training, you kind of found this so late. I would guess your first thing that you would change, you would have found it earlier. Like that's the no-brainer, right? You would have found it at 17 and not 37 or whatever you were. Is that what you were? Somewhere there?
Yeah, probably 37. Yeah, something like that. Every single person I've ever trained said the same thing. I mean, even 17-year-olds are like, man, I wish I found this over.
You and I have had this conversation. I started training for real at 17. God, if I could have started at 14. Think of the difference. Yep. We could have gone to state. I could have thrown this football over them there mountains. That's what, but.
Yeah, everybody says that. Yeah. I've got one client that doesn't say that, and he did get started. I think he and his father came up and saw you when he was 13.
Oh, yeah. I know who you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, this guy he's about 17 years old, Jacob, and he needs to continue gaining weight. I was like, I'll give you $1 for every pound you gain this
That's
month.
a good idea.
And if you gain 30, I'll give you 30 more in weigh outs tomorrow. We'll see. He's probably got to pay me.
Kid. He's one of those kids he started lifting when he was 13
kid.
and just your typical like prepubescent string bean, little bitty thin kid, small frame. And then I remember showing up, we did that training day in Tulsa, and I showed up and he was like 6 foot tall. All of a sudden he had gone from like literally like 5'3" to 6 feet tall in like 4 months.
in 2 years.
It was crazy, the difference. Yeah. I mean, it was like, this is not the same human. But he was still, but of course, like when you grow that tall, like this might be hard to believe, Scott Hambrick, but I was a little chunky as a kid growing up. And when I finally hit puberty at 17, not 14 or 13, I went from 5'5" and chunky to 6 foot, 6'1", whatever I am, somewhere between those two, and like skinny as a rail.
Right.
When you just grow that fast, I don't know that it's even possible to put on weight. Like, it's tough to put on weight. And so when you're going through the actual growth spurt, like, he's probably now hit that growth spurt and it's done and he can start putting on some muscular body weight. But it's like my body just consumed the fat that was on me. And
how many calories does it take to make all that bone that you have to make to grow 4 inches?
Can you imagine? I don't know. There's probably some studies on that.
I've looked.
So
I haven't been able to find anything.
Can't find anything like that?
No, it's out there, I'm sure. But everybody says that, and I agree. I wish I'd have found it earlier. But again, I don't even these games like this. It bugs me. I'm like, I didn't.
Well,
I did as well as I could.
And that discussion can't really help our listeners. I assume that our listeners are actually lifting, so they all have the same wish that they had started earlier. So the question when they ask, like, what would you do different? That's their way of saying, hey, you guys have probably done this longer than I have, than they have.
Right.
Certainly I have. What would we do differently so that they can learn from our mistakes? I mean, I think that's the point of the question.
Well, here's your one then. If you're listening and you've been putting off getting started, then you need to go ahead and get started. Yeah. Because, how strong you get and how good you get at this is really a function of, when you don't compare yourself to other people anyway, it's really a function of how long you've done it.
Yep.
There's a show we need to do. We need to do a show about your training age.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Agreed.
I'm stronger than most of my clients, but it's not because I'm more gifted. It's just, I've been doing it longer than they have, and they'll, as their training age increases, they're going to get stronger. So you want to do everything you can to make sure that you just stay patient with yourself and get started now and just stay with it.
Yeah, I think that most people, I got really lucky. I say lucky. I worked hard to kind of find this, but I got lucky in that I found the right people early. So I never really fell into, or at least would have only been for a very short period of time, fell into the muscle and fitness trap of following those type of exercise programs. And very early, I found Glenn Penlay and I found Louis Simmons and started reading all those Russian guys and stuff. I got really into it in the late 90s. And so I'm sure a lot of people would look back and go, gosh, I followed all this stupid stuff for years and years and years, and then I finally got serious about it. But I really was pretty serious about training pretty early. And so it wasn't really the knowledge base that I wish that I had, I wish I had discovered these great books about strength training, because I found those guys pretty early. So for me, it's in the actual training itself. And I go back and I think about the way I trained. I am one of those people who are balls to the wall or nothing. And one of the things I wish I could do better is I am not good. I've kind of coined that phrase of blue collar days in the weight room. I'll be honest with everybody. I don't have very many of those. Like in my whole, the past 20 years, I don't have very many blue collar days. I regret it. I wish I was better at having blue collar days. When I was competing, and it was my entire life, and it consumed me to a point that it was like beyond really probably what it should have been at the time, where I was a professional power lifter, a professional strongman, and which means that I got free protein and hotel rooms and food and no money. When I did those things, like it was my whole life, I would never miss training. I would sacrifice my family for it. all those sort of things. I can remember when I had my first daughter, when I had Kaylin, they were still in the hospital. Mama had a C-section. They were still in the hospital, and it was the next day after having a kid. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go train for a few hours. And I went and did strongman. And my wife probably doesn't even remember that. She was kind of sleeping and in and out. And your daughter's kind of in that nursery. But I think back, like, what a dumbass. Like, why wouldn't I have just spent all that time with my family? So I did that, and I was balls to the wall. And then there have been more recently for the past 10 years, it's really been the opposite. It's been, man, my life is stressful with business or whatever, and I let things get in the way. And I very much wish that I had remained consistent. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, that consistency really is the number one thing. Consistency and form. And my form has always been actually really pretty good. You've watched me. Like, I certainly have these handicaps with things like my hips, and I can't squat exactly the way we like to squat because of having bad hips. Although most of that is not because I did something wrong necessarily. It's just genetic. Like, certainly I think that the sort of west side wide squatting and the strongman, the running down the street with yokes on my back and 400-pound farmer's walks per hand, probably exacerbated the hip problem, but the hips were going to be a problem anyway. So my form has always been pretty good, but my consistency has always been 100% or 10%.
Right.
And I've never really been an 85, 90% consistency sort of guy. And I wish in the midst of the stress that I could be. And so if that's you and you're hearing this, like, if I could go back and do it over again, I would have remained more consistent, would be my first piece. Another one for me is I think I would have focused on health a little more. Even, you go back and obviously the hindsight of when you're a competitive lifter, like a highly competitive athlete, the things that you eat and the things you put in your body and the things that you're just, like, your life is that and that alone. No one would go back and say, like, hey, a guy that's in the NFL, like, you could certainly argue that a person who has given their life to powerlifting or strongman, you're like, man, what's the point? Because, like, the chances of, like, fame or fortune in that is essentially zero.
Yeah.
But most people could understand, for an NFL athlete who's making millions of dollars, like, well, they're making a trade-off there. They're sacrificing their body for fame and fortune. And so they can understand that. And so I don't know that I would say that I would have focused more on health when I was 21 or 24 or whatever. But at the time when I hit 30, which doesn't seem very old, but you and I have talked about this, like, I felt a massive change in my body, and my body's ability to recover was at 30. It wasn't at 40. For me, it was at 30. So I hit puberty at 17, and I felt the decline at 30. I had about 13 decent years there where I could actually train. And at 30 and 32 and 34 and 35, I was still trying to train like I was 25. And I was really beating myself up. And I wish I had spent more time doing things for health. I wish I had eaten better for health. I wish I had done a little more conditioning. I'm not talking about I wish I had done trail running and mud runs and endurance bike races. I mean, I wish I had done a little more prowler work. I wish I had eaten a little cleaner. I wish I'd eaten a little less shit. I wish I'd done a little more kind of accessory volume in the inn. I wish I'd paid a little more attention to those things that are now sort of nagging injuries, like my posterior delts, my rear delts. I've got this infraspinatus problem on my right side that I think I could have avoided had I just taken some time to work through those issues and not just push through. Like, the things I've learned from guys like Will Morris and Rebecca Seigan and Darren Deaton, those are PT people, about how to properly rehab aches and pains. I wish I had done that. That's a big, and even things that we've sort of shit on in the past that make me feel better. Like, I wish I'd been more consistent with doing things like just hitting my shoulders with a lacrosse ball. And I don't know that it actually helps on a physiological level. I mean, maybe it does. I think Will Morris would argue that it does. I think I would have spent a little more time working on, we shit on mobility. And I wish I had worked on my shoulders a little bit more with that sort of stuff. I was lazy with the shrug at the top of the press. I didn't spend enough time trying to really get a nice big lockout. And I've got this, like, So I've got these places on my body that I think I could have spent more time where I focused on health. That didn't mean that over time I'm not going to get older and more beat up, and there's probably not much you can do about osteoarthritis and things like that. But so that for me, the consistency of training I wish I'd done, and I wish I'd focused a little more on health. I remember I got real strong. I got real strong in my 20s.
Right.
And so I was in a position that maybe a lot of people don't get to be in, which is I got really, really, really strong. And then I needed to make a decision, which should have been like, okay, now it's time to lift for health and be strong, stay strong, but be healthy. And instead, I'm so wired for competition. I don't know how to not just push the weights. And now, I want to be careful, because if you're listening to this and your squat's 175 and you're like, man, I just want to be healthy, and I don't want to hurt my body and get too strong. Like, that's not what I'm saying. If you squat 175 and you're a dude, you're not strong enough. I'm talking about, like, I was squatting over 600 raw. I was squatting 800 in a suit. I was running down the street with 930 pounds on my back on a yoke. Like, post those days, I wish I'd taken some time and gotten healthy.
It's not too late.
No, I'm doing it. I actually really enjoy it, man. I got a reverse hyper from Randy Winfrey, and I'm excited to use a reverse hyper. I've got that Echo bike. I've got a rower. I like doing some circuit work at the end of a workout now. I still lift pretty damn heavy. I have to lift low volume on squats and deadlifts and heavy, and I tend to do higher volume on upper body because of the torn pecs and things like that. By the way, I don't think there was anything I could do to avoid the torn pecs. I could have not been a competitive lifter. Probably could have avoided that, but otherwise, like, that's just, my body just wasn't made to be able to lift quite that heavy. And so, I enjoy it. I actually, when I eat right and I lift still really decently heavy, and then I do some additional work, I like to do some kind of gut busting, accessory conditioning work at the end. I feel so much better. I just feel better. Not you.
Can't relate to that.
Yep. No. I've coached Scott for many years, and I could never get him to do an ounce of accessory work.
No.
You think one day you'll change? Maybe not. I mean, like, you started this old enough where you'll be like, I'm not really interested in ever doing accessory work ever.
Nope. I mean, what would it get me? I've got nothing but PRs for years and years and years. Sure. Like, what's it going to get me?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've started, you're strong enough now that you're starting to talk about you can feel the aches and pains from the lifting, right? Like you walk down the stairs and like, ugh. For me, that accessory work seems to help that significantly. The more of that I do at the end, and I'm talking about, I do a bunch of it in like 15 minutes. Like, I'm not talking about I spend an hour doing bodybuilding exercises. I just feel better. So I don't have any data to show that it actually is better, structurally better, that the joints or the tendons or the ligaments or any of that stuff is healthier. I have no data for any of that, but I know that I feel better. Well, it's like you got a sauna at your house, right? And you got a pool, and you get in that sauna and you get in that pool, and you're like, God damn, I feel a lot better. I don't know if that actually helps anything.
Deaton did jump all over me, and he's like, you need to do some super, super, super light dips, for my shoulders, so I've been doing some of those, but it just sucks. There you go.
You don't like it, huh?
I mean, it's just all extra.
Yeah.
It's just all extra. Again, I'm not doing this for fun.
Sure.
Don't even like it.
Sure. So we talked about business, some of the few things, like little stories there that we would do different. We talked about training, some of the things we do different. Is there anything in coaching as a coach that you would have done differently? Having not coached that long, you're still, you're a hell of a coach, but you're still sort of a newbie coach.
Yeah, of course. But what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, I want you to give advice to people who are wanting to become a coach. Like, what are some of the things you would have done differently, or what's the direction you would send them if that were the case?
I'm pretty pleased with the arc of my coaching story. I mean, I really don't know what I'd do differently. We always misserve our early clients. You always will, and I wish I could have done differently, but you can't.
Yeah,
you can't. You're not good enough yet. You don't know enough yet, and you're just going to do that. And I wish that wasn't the case, but that's just how it's going to be. Yeah. And you can tell somebody that's getting started with coaching to be careful with that, and they'll do their best, and they're still going to look back on it and say, I wish I had done better.
Sure. But that person who's coming at it as a neophyte coach with a knowledge base that is correct, right? So they come out of this and they know in general what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to squat and deadlift and do the big lifts and add a little weight every time to linear progression. Even though they're going to mess things up, it's going to be exponentially better the people that they're training, which are often family and friends, and they're doing it for free, than that person going to Planet Fitness and getting trained by the guy in the purple polo.
Sure.
And so it's still beneficial for both. That's why you can't either in the beginning when you first start coaching, you can't charge anything. And then you get to the point where you can't charge much. You got to charge 25, 30, 40 bucks an hour. And eventually, it's just like anything else. Like as you become a master of your craft, and coaching certainly falls under that category, you're able to charge more. You've got more demand. You've got lower supply. And, you're more confident that you're not going to screw your people up. And so, I think for me, it would just be, it's not something I would have done differently, but the thing I'm very thankful I did was it was a ferocious pursuit of knowledge. Like I didn't, for whatever reason, that thing, and I've always been a learner. We've had episodes about this. Like I've loved to learn, but for whatever reason, the passion behind my learning about strength training started in the mid-90s and has never faltered. Mm-hmm. In 2019, it's been 22 years, 23 years, somewhere there that I've been like crazy. I'm talking about learning about training. Like I had Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding when I was 13 years old, and I love that book. I read every word of that book, so you could actually go back that far. I just, that was a misguided book. It wasn't really a book on training. But that really started to pique my interest. And then by the time I was 17, 18 years old, I was digging in on these crazy Russians. And so I would say if you want to coach, like I'm surprised at the amount of people who won't ferociously pursue the knowledge that they need to have to set them apart. And the combination between the knowledge and the experience is what makes a great master craftsman. There's other pieces that go along with it. You got to have the personality for this sort of thing. You got to be able to talk to people and communicate well, but ultimately, it's this combination of knowledge and experience. You can have all the knowledge in the world and no experience, and you can't, I can read all about brain surgery. I can take the test and pass and get the diploma and be like, yep, great. And having never done brain surgery, I'm not a brain surgeon, which is really the problem with, most of these certifications. Most of the certifications out there is it's a multiple choice test, which proves that you have the knowledge to pass their multiple choice tests, but no practical experience. And then there's a lot of people who have a ton of practical experience. I've seen this a ton too. In the powerlifting world, there's a ton of this. You've got these guys. You see these guys. I won't call any of them out by name, but especially some of the more famous Instagram powerlifters, coaches who are well-respected coaches. They don't know shit. They just have experience. Yeah. That doesn't mean they're worthless. I mean, they've developed a bunch of knowledge, 20 years, 25, 30 years of experience in the weight room, but they couldn't tell you what the hamstrings do.
Yeah, and they may not be teachers either.
Sure.
Yeah, and so the internet will criticize me because I'm not that strong or whatever. Well, why are you a good coach? This other guy's stronger. Well, I'm a teacher.
That's right.
I'm a teacher. I'm a good communicator. I'm good at conveying knowledge to other people, and that's why. Yeah. That's why.
Yeah, the fitness world is one of those places where for some reason people haven't figured that out yet, right? Like everybody knows Michael Jordan was a bad coach. Michael Jordan was a bad coach.
Right.
I mean, no one would say Michael Jordan was a good coach. He wasn't, right? The best coaches in the NBA were the most mediocre players or even shitty players. There's some really good football coaches, who never played football.
Mike Leach.
Yeah.
Where was he? Was he at Texas Tech? He was the offensive coordinator at OU when they won the championship in whatever that was, 2000, 2001. They went to Texas Tech. I'm super interested in that guy. He never played football.
Right.
And as a result, he's had a crazy unconventional approach, and he's a winning coach.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference. So you got to have both those, right? So you got to have the knowledge, and I think in today's world of like internet jockeys, you actually probably have more people that have knowledge and have zero experience, because the information is now out there. Back in the 90s, when told those stories where I had to go on a treasure hunt to find the books in the catacombs of the library. Like that's not, those books can be downloaded for free on PDF on the internet in 4 seconds now. And so the knowledge is there, but the experience takes time. You can't get that very quick. So yeah, that's the big thing for me as a coach. I think I have empathy is such a huge part of this. We've talked to Pewter about this. Like as a coach, if you don't have empathy for your clients, you cannot be a good coach.
Right.
You can't. If you can't understand and feel what they feel and empathize with what they're feeling and what they're experiencing, and that's part of being a.
No, I don't have to feel it, but I have to understand it.
Yeah, you're right. Sure. But most of the time, you cannot. Most of the time in coaching, you're not just empathizing. You're often sympathizing because you have actually felt that before. You have experiences that you say, I remember what it was like to feel this. So not only can I empathize with you and I can recognize and validate the way you feel right now, I can also remember what it was like to feel that very thing. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you get people that feel weird shit and you're like, I don't know, man. But most of the time you can relate, which I think is important. So you got to do this yourself. So yeah, all those things are important as a coach, as a lifter, as a business person.
I really hate the do-over game. I'm like almost philosophically opposed to it.
I just think we're looking at it. I think there's a paradigm shift between the way I'm viewing it and the way you're viewing it. You're viewing it as me actually asking you, Scott, if you could go and do it over again, what would you do? Well, that's the way you have to pose the question. But the way to look at it is, for our listeners who haven't done it yet, what are the lessons that they can learn from your mistakes so that they don't have to make the same mistakes? Does that make sense?
No, I've got one. Don't do it.
Oh, as a coach, you mean? Don't be a coach?
Yeah, don't even coach. Just go do something
so
else. Enjoy your.
Disagree. Why would you say that?
Because almost nobody makes any money doing this.
Well, we make money.
It takes and we're almost no one.
Yeah, I know. You're right.
I mean, almost nobody makes money at this. They spend hours and hours and hours and hours with it. This is one of the deals that this is like, I want to be an actor. I want to be a rock star. I want to whatever. It's so crowded with people who have tried to turn their hobby into their living that it's just full of competition, and it's not a good industry to be in for most people.
For most people,
we do fine.
For 99.9%, you're actually you're right.
If you're like, I'm going to be the best darn cabinet maker in my town, okay, you got a shot at that. But every single guy that likes the gym takes a turn at being a trainer or a coach.
Sure.
And, on one hand, they're no good at it and they don't know anything, and we know all that stuff about them. But you spend all your days, which is what this podcast is about, in fact, educating the consumer about the difference between you and them.
Sure.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, you're trying to get people to do something that's quite miserable. Like, hey, I want you to pay me to essentially torture you.
Beat the hell out of you. Right.
Yeah. And people don't want to do it.
Look, when I got into public school teaching, I still had this naive sense of I'm changing people's lives.
Right.
And most people would look at teachers and say, man, that's a valiant job. Like they're really, that's an honorable thing that you do, changing people's. Dude, I don't feel like I changed anybody's life compared to the number of people's lives I've changed doing this. And so the payoff in the change in other people's lives has been tremendous for me. And really, I'm not trying to act like it's not altruistic. I don't care about making money. Like, making money is awesome, right? It's fun. It's what I do this is what I do to feed my family and to pay the bills. So I have to make money at this thing, but I really enjoy the fact that we get to change people's lives. And secondly, you're exactly right. For the vast majority of people who are out there, they should never get into the fitness industry, period.
Yep.
But
enjoy your hobby, learn.
But the people who are listening to this podcast are not your average person in the fitness industry. And I'm not trying to, this is not, never talked about this, is not to be a commercial, but there is actually a path now that you can take to become a coach and get paid very, very well. And we've created that path. Like you can actually go and do the academy and learn the coaching academy at Barbell Logic and learn everything that you need to know to be a coach. You come out of that and you know everything you need to know to be a coach. Now you might not have the experience, but if you do well on the knowledge part, the classroom part, you'll get invited to be an intern. And if you get to be an intern at Barbell Logic, you will become a coach. And we'll help you become a coach, and we'll help you get certified. When you get certified, you will get a job, and because we'll hire you. And then once you have a job, you will get paid, and you will get paid well. And so now that cream rises to the top, right? So how many people have we had go into the academy? 250, maybe, something like that. How many people are interns? 22. Now we've had several others. Obviously, we've had actually quite a few that have come through. And so you're talking about 10% of the people that go through the academy will become coaches. That's probably a ballpark number. But for those people, it's completely changed their lives. And so, yep, it's a bunch of competition. But there is a pathway to become a coach. And we're going to continue to refine that process more and more to make great coaches out of medium coaches, and to make master coaches out of great coaches. And so I think there's a big payoff, and there's a big reward in the refining process I see in people's lives doing that, both seeing someone become a great coach and then seeing the people that they impact as a great coach, like their clients. See, hearing your stories about not you, but about your clients.
Sure.
Is huge. So, yep, if you want to get a job for the money and only for the money, this is not the right industry probably.
Sure. But, I come in there and I tell these stories, but I'm special.
I know. Yeah.
I draw these people to me. I'm able to communicate with them. And chances are you can't, whoever is listening. So be brutally honest with yourself. Yeah. People don't come to you to hear what you say. If you're not able to communicate your ideas to other people, if you feel misunderstood all the time,
right,
and on and on and on, maybe you're not going to be a great coach. Right. So be brutally honest with yourself. It's possible to be. And the thing is, I think if you're not going to be pretty great, you're going to have a really hard time in this marketplace.
Yep. I agree.
Because there's a whole bunch of wingnuts down there wearing the shirt with the trainer thing on it. They are legion.
Yep. Yep.
And you've got to be
exceptional.
Yeah, and not only exceptional, you probably have to have a hook too. A former pro strongman. Whatever hooks I've got. But, I'm not just some, decently strong, indifferentiatable, 27-year-old guy.
Well, wait a minute. What are your hooks?
That I'm older and that I've done it.
Okay. Intelligence.
Yeah. They get literature and philosophy and psychology and all kinds of more stuff thrown in there when I do the coaching. And after they come from one session, they realize that this is not the same kind of guy that, I had hired and failed with earlier. They pretty quickly learn that I'm not the same kind of guy.
Yeah. But I think on the surface, when you think about who our coaches are at Barbell Logic, it just looks like a whole bunch of normal people, right? You got me, the ex-pro strongman. You got Jordan Stanton, who's, big and strong as fuck. But for the most part, these are just on the outside looking in, they're just normal people, but there is something exceptional about each one of them. Right. So I just want to be clear. If you don't have to have been a pro strongman or a pro powerlifter or super fucking strong or famous in some other realm or any of those things. It might just be a thing about your personality. You think about a guy like Darren Deaton. Darren Deaton has an infectious personality. He's one of the most likable guys I've ever met. Just likable, and so he can draw people to him. So he'll be successful.
Last weekend, by the way, Darren said that I was his spirit child.
Oh, nice.
That's like the greatest thing anybody's ever told me.
Yeah, Darren means a lot to me. He said some very kind words as well. So it's tough, but I still think the payoff is good. And so if you've got to be honest with yourself. Everybody's seen the old, I don't even know if American Idol's still on anymore, but that concept where you get these people that go on American Idol who are super passionate about being singers, very passionate. I am going to be a star. And then they go and they sing, and they don't realize that they're making the cut on TV because they're the ones that are so bad that the rest of the world is laughing at them. So this idea of following your passion at all costs is ridiculous.
Yep.
If you're not cut out to do it, you're not cut out to do it. I said this at Strong years before we ever got into this stuff, that I would hire coaches based on personality way before I'd hire them based on knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
Because I can get them the knowledge and experience. But if they're introverted, socially awkward, I can't fix that. I've had those conversations. I had that conversation. We had a kid, super smart, really good, just knowledgeable coach, written communicator, socially awkward AF at Strong. Mm-hmm. And he is now he does a pretty good job in the online coaching community as a registered dietitian. He's got a PhD, does nutrition coaching, not for us, for a different company, and does pretty good. But that's his realm. He has to be in the online. He typed, written, he's fine. Being infectious, talking to people. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? Hey, you want to talk about Chiefs and grilling steak and drinking a beer and getting a smooth bore? Sounds fun. That guy he couldn't do that, right? So that's the stuff we would change, and that doesn't mean that we would actually go back and change it. I've said this many times. Like there are very, very few things in my life that if I could go back and do them over again, I would actually change, because I recognize that it's only because of the mistakes that I've made. Those mistakes refine me into the person that I am today, which is not at all perfect or refined. It's just more refined than the guy I was at 25. And I had to fall on my face several times, more than several times.
You bet. We're the sum of our experiences, and to want to change one of those experiences is ultimately to want to be someone different. And I imagine that there are people out there that would like to be very much to be somebody different, but I don't. Yeah. But I really don't.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Warts and all,
But also, I think it's important if you can learn from the mistakes of others, so that you fall on your face a few less times. That's valuable as well, right? That's one of the reasons I think that you're reading these great books, and we learn from these people. We're like, look, man, there's some really smart people that have gone ahead of us, and there are lessons to be learned from them that we don't have to learn on our own. We're not in a vacuum with no education. Like we can learn from them. So I hope that you, our listeners, can take some of these lessons that Scott and I have learned over the years, and you can apply them to your life so that you don't have to fall on your face, so that you can make fewer of those mistakes, learn on your own, and become a better coach, better human, better lifter, better whatever than Scott and I are. That's the goal, right? I remember thinking when I first became a strength coach, that a mark of a good strength coach is to be able to coach a handful of people who, especially if you were a good lifter, a really good lifter, like I was not a great lifter, but I was a good lifter. I've been able to coach a lot of people who are better lifters, than I ever was. And I think that's tough. And I think certainly don't think it's the only mark of a good coach, but I think it is a mark of a good coach to be able to, can you take somebody past the place that you were? Michael Jordan could never do that. He couldn't make the better person.
Yeah, it's going to be,
the standard's
tough for him.
And I get it. But not only that, he didn't do a very good job, I don't think, of making the mediocre players good players. He struggled with that. And I think that might even be the better mark of a good. I've always talked about I want to see the middle of the bell curve shift to the right. That's the mark of a good coach. It's not who the outliers are on the far end of the right side of the scale. It's shifting the middle of the bell curve.
Did you read Brett's book, The Warrior Philosophy? No. Yeah, so McKay just wrote this little ebook called The Warrior Monk Philosophy of Trainer Cus D'Amato.
Oh yeah, you were talking about that. Yeah, we've got to read that.
I finished about half of it.
Is it paid?
No, you got to pay for it. It's on you can get it on Amazon. Of course, you can get it at Art of
It's just an ebook. How much is it? You remember? It's an ebook. Ballpark? It's probably cheap. It's an ebook, right?
$3.99,
it's $5.99.
Yeah. But he writes about how Cus's main advantages over the other coaches was his deep understanding of the psychology of young men. And I think that if you're going to take that
to be used both for good and evil, by the way.
Well, sure.
Yeah. I mean, he did.
But you can if you have a little better understanding of psychology, the psychology of the lifter than the other guy does, you can.
It's huge.
You can get a little more out of the client, and you're doing it for them. You're not doing it for you. You get a little more out of that client and show them that there's something else of them that they weren't aware of. Yeah. And I've enjoyed reading that.
Well, I started listening to the Teddy Atlas podcast. It's great. Gosh, he's been killing it. Brett's been killing it with the podcast lately. Gosh, the what's the Friar? God, that's so good.
Yeah, Richard Rohr
podcast, so good.
Podcast with Teddy Atlas, boxing trainer Teddy Atlas is awesome, and then he followed that right up with one by Father Richard Rohr about sort of men's spirituality and the father wound.
Oh, so good, so good. When you first start hearing him talking, it's like, oh man, this is going to be a snoozeville, because he's not a real boisterous speaker.
No,
and then you start listening to the content of the words he's saying, and you're like, oh shit, man, this guy's.
Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. Go find some of his stuff. Go find that podcast with Brett. And
Franciscan
listen to
Friar,
that one.
Right?
Yeah.
The guy's that's a wise dude. He knows what he's talking about.
I hope that was helpful. I don't know.
It's going to be super helpful to people. It's just not helpful to us.
Yeah, I do this for me.
I know. That's why you don't like it. I do it for you.
But there's another podcast. Leave your questions at questions@barbell-logic.com. We got to get that fixed. And go to iTunes, give us a 5-star review, and tell people a little bit about the show. That some people use that when they're shopping for something new to listen to.
Yeah, word of mouth is a big deal. I think we've actually had a nice boost from word of mouth on sharing, like Instagram. Like, you snap that podcast that you're listening to while you're on your road trip or at the grocery store mowing your lawn, and you share it on Instagram or make a post on Twitter, and that helps for sure. So
here, I'll read a review.
Hopefully it's a good one?
It is. 5-star. He says, if for nothing else, the tip on Robert Randolph and the Family Band is worth 5 stars. How did I not know this guy existed?
Oh, that's cool.
He checked the local concert dates and found a free concert with him at the Jazz and Ribs Fest. I don't know where that was. He said, talk about money in the bank with the wife. They're her new favorite. Combine this with weight training, bourbon, and references to the great literature of all time, and you've got a winner. There you go.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, and now you know about Richard Rohr, too. Go pick that up. We'll talk to you guys in a few days.
See ya.
We'll all be dead soon.